She called me the charity case loud enough for the whole table to hear, and I smiled like I didn't understand what she meant. By the end of that night, she would lose everything she thought she had built, and I would finally stop pretending I wasn't the reason any of it existed. My brother Liam had been dating Serena for 8 months when he announced the engagement. I found out through a text from my mom that read, "Your brother has exciting news. Call him." That was it. No call from Liam. No heads up. Just the kind of message that reminded me exactly where I stood in my own family. I didn't grow up poor, but I grew up overlooked. My parents ran a small landscaping company out of our garage in Akron, Ohio, and Liam was their golden kid, football player, class president, the one teachers remembered by name. I was the one who stayed quiet, read books, got a partial scholarship to a state school nobody had heard of, and moved to Columbus after graduation to work for a tech startup that nobody believed in. That startup was called ClearPath Solutions. I joined as employee number 11 when I was 23, writing documentation and managing client communications because I could hold three things in my head at once, and most of the engineers couldn't. Within 2 years, I owned 4% equity. Within four more, when the company sold a majority stake to a private equity group out of Chicago, my 4% became enough to change my life in ways I still had trouble saying out loud. I didn't tell my family. Not right away. They'd stopped asking how work was going somewhere around the time Liam got hired as a regional sales manager at a medical device company, and my dad started introducing him at church as our son who's really going places. I kept sending money home every month, $1,200, then $1,500, then $2,000 when my mom mentioned the HVAC system had died and they didn't know how they'd replace it. I sent it through an account that just showed up as a transfer from CPT, Financial Services. My mom thought it was some kind of government benefit she'd forgotten signing up for. She never pushed. Liam didn't know, or if he suspected, he never asked. Serena definitely didn't know. I met her for the first time at my parents' house in March, 3 weeks before the engagement party. She came in wearing a cream-wrapped dress and carrying a bottle of Whispering Angel rosé, which she handed to my mom with both hands like she was presenting an offering. She was beautiful in that specific, composed way that makes you understand immediately that she has always been beautiful and knows exactly what it has gotten her. She looked at me. I was sitting on the couch in jeans and a flannel shirt, holding a mug of coffee, and she said, "Oh, you must be the sister Liam said you work in tech?" "Something like that," I said. She smiled politely and turned back to my mom. Over dinner, she talked about her family's place in Hilton Head, about the charity gala she was co-chairing in the spring, about how she and Liam were looking at a condo in the short north that had such good bones. I watched my mom refill Serena's wine glass twice without being asked, and I thought, she has already decided who matters in this room. The engagement party was held 6 weeks later at a venue in Dublin, Ohio, a rented event space inside a boutique hotel that her family used for a lot of their functions, the Hartley Grand. I'd been there once before for a client dinner, which is how I knew that the group that managed it had recently been acquired by the holding company my financial advisor had quietly helped me fold my ClearPath proceeds into 18 months ago. I knew the GM by first name. I had a standing reservation under a different name for the rooftop suite. I did not share any of this with anyone. I drove up from Columbus alone on a Saturday afternoon. I had an early call with a contractor that morning and hadn't had time to change, so I showed up in dark trousers and a clean white button-down, my hair pulled back. I wasn't dressed badly. I also wasn't dressed the way Serena's bridesmaids were dressed, matching blowouts, wrapped dresses, little gold earrings like punctuation marks. The moment I walked in, I felt the temperature shift. Serena's mother, a woman named Diane who wore a blazer the color of a summer storm and spoke in full paragraphs, looked me up and down once and then turned to the woman next to her and said something I wasn't meant to hear, but definitely did. "That's the sister. She works in IT or something. I think the family has struggled a little. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and kept walking. The room was full of people I didn't know. Serena's father stood at the center of things like a man who had learned to perform warmth at some point in his 40s and had been performing it ever since. Her friends clustered near the bar and laughed at things with the specific ease of people who have never once worried about whether they were welcome somewhere. Liam found me near the windows. He looked happy, genuinely, unguardedly happy in a way I hadn't seen on him in years. And I held that. I reminded myself I was here for him. You came, he said, like he wasn't entirely sure I would. Of course I came. He hugged me, and for a second it was just us, the way it had been when we were kids, sharing the back seat of a 1998 Civic on long drives. Then Serena materialized at his elbow, and the moment dissolved. Liam's sister, she said, which was not my name. So glad you made it. Wouldn't miss it, I said. She tilted her head slightly. We were a little worried. Liam said you've had kind of a rough patch lately? Financially? I looked at Liam. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm doing fine, I said. Of course you are, Serena said, and she touched my arm once, briefly, like I was a surface she wasn't sure was clean, and then she was gone. I stayed near the windows. I ate the past appetizers. I watched my mom laugh too loudly at something Serena's father said and felt something tight and tired move through my chest. It was maybe 40 minutes in when the real moment happened. Serena's mother had gathered a small group near the photo wall, the kind of installation with fresh flowers and a neon sign that said "Love Always," and I drifted close enough to hear her talking about the venue. We use this place for everything, she said. The management is just wonderful, very accommodating. We have a relationship with the ownership group. She paused. Well, the previous ownership group. There's been some transition lately, which I'm honestly not thrilled about. New money, I've heard. No one with any real history in this city. One of the bridesmaids, a tall woman with a sleek ponytail, glanced toward me and then back at Serena's mother, and I caught the small smile that passed between them. Serena materialized again, the way she had a talent for doing. Have you been to the new rooftop space? She asked her mother, angling her body so that I was slightly behind her, visible but irrelevant. We should see if we can use it for the bridal shower. I know people. Her mother said. Though I've heard the new owners have been very particular about access, she searched for the word proprietary. Serena laughed. Well, money doesn't always come with taste, does it? She still hadn't turned around. I was scenery. No, I said clearly, it doesn't. But it does come with access. Serena turned then. The smile on her face was the kind that doesn't move the eyes. Sorry. The rooftop. I have a standing reservation up there, under my name. If you want me to look into the bridal shower booking, I'm happy to make a call. She stared at me for just a bit too long. That's very sweet, but we have our own contacts. Of course, I said. I excused myself and walked to the hallway outside the main room. I found a quiet corner near the coat check and I called my GM, a man named Robert who picked up on the second ring because he always picked up on the second ring. How's the party? He asked. Interesting, I said. Quick question. The Hartley Grant, can you confirm for me who the current primary stakeholder is in the property management group? A pause. That would be your holding company. Through the Clearview Capital umbrella, yeah. And who's named as the controlling interest in Clearview Capital? He laughed a little uncertain. You are. You know that. I do, I said. Thank you, Robert. I stood in the hallway for a minute. I wasn't angry exactly. I'd been here before, in rooms where I was invisible, where people used my brother's name to acknowledge I existed, where women with the right shoes and the right resume looked through me like I was plate glass. I knew what it felt like to be dismissed. What was different now was that I didn't have to accept it as the final word. I went back inside. My mom was talking with Serena's father again. My dad was standing near the bar with a beer he was holding but not drinking. Liam was across the room, glowing with the particular happiness of a man who believes everything is going right. I walked to the center of the room and I waited for a pause in the ambient noise, the moment between one song ending and another beginning, and I spoke at a volume that was slightly louder than conversation, but not quite a speech. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, but I want to say something while everyone's together. Serena turned from the group she was standing with. Her mother turned. The bridesmaids turned. Liam looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. I'm really happy for my brother, I said. He deserves good things. He always has. I paused. I also want to clear something up, because I've heard a few things tonight that I should probably address. The room had gone quiet in that particular way. Rooms go quiet when they sense something is about to happen. I work in tech, I said. I have for about 10 years. A few years ago, the company I helped build was acquired, and I used part of my proceeds to invest in a real estate and property management holding group. That group, Clearview Capital, is the current controlling stakeholder in the management company that operates this venue. No one spoke. I'm telling you that not to make anything uncomfortable, I said, though something in me was done performing comfort for people who hadn't offered me any. I'm telling you because I heard someone mention tonight that the new ownership here has no history in this city. I wanted to put a face to that. I looked at Seren's mother directly. I'm Liam's sister. I grew up in Akron. I went to school on a partial scholarship. And I own this building. The silence lasted maybe 4 seconds. Serena's face had gone very still. Her mother's had gone a color that had no name. My mom was staring at me from across the room. Liam had set down his drink. It was Serena's mother who recovered first. She laughed, a short social sound, a little too sharp at the edges. Well, she said, how impressive. Thank you, I said, and I meant it completely without warmth. I turned to Liam. His eyes were a little glassy. I've been sending money home for the last 6 years, I said quietly, though the room was still quiet enough that it carried. The HVAC, the roof repair, the property taxes in 2021 when things got tight. That was me. I kept it anonymous because I didn't want it to be a thing. But I think it should probably be a thing now. My mom made a sound I'd never heard from her before. Something between a gasp and a word that didn't form all the way. My dad put down the beer. Serena looked at Liam. You didn't know? She asked, and her voice had lost its polish. She sounded, for the first time, like a person instead of a performance. I didn't know, he said. That was the moment that mattered to me. Not the silence after I said I owned the building, not the color that left Serena's mother's face. It was watching my brother realize that the floor he'd been standing on this whole time had been laid, quietly, by the sister he'd forgotten to call. The party didn't end immediately. These things never do. There was a 20-minute period of awkward recalibration where the conversation restarted and people returned to their drinks and the DJ, who had apparently not noticed anything, launched into something upbeat that landed wrong in the room. Serena's mother approached me near the appetizer table with her hand extended and a smile she was working very hard to construct. I think we got off on the wrong foot, she said. We got off on the foot. We got off on, I said pleasantly. And I shook her hand, and I did not offer anything more. Serena found me near the coat check at the end of the night when people were filtering out. She'd taken off the gold earrings at some point, and she looked younger without them. More honest. I said some things earlier that I want to take back, she said. Which ones? I asked. She blinked. All of them, I think. I studied her for a moment. There was something real there, something that had been underneath the performance all night and was only now willing to show its face. I thought about what it would cost me to hold this forever, the tight, airless thing of carrying a grudge into someone else's marriage, into every future holiday, every future phone call. Okay, I said. Okay. I'm not forgiving anything tonight, I told her. But I'm willing to start from here. She nodded. It wasn't a resolution, it was an opening. Liam waited by my car while everyone else said their goodbyes. It was cold. One of those clear Ohio March nights where the sky is enormous and the parking lot is very bright and you can see your breath. He had his hands in his jacket pockets and he looked like he was 19 again, like we were waiting for our dad to pull around after a school event. 6 years, he said. 6 years. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about that for a long time before I answered. Because I didn't want it to change how you saw me, I said. And then it became a habit. And then I guess I wanted to see how long it would take someone to ask where the money was coming from. He looked at the ground. I should have asked. Yeah, I said, you should have. We stood there for another minute, not talking. The cold was the kind that makes things feel simple. I want to know you, he said finally. Like actually know you. Not just the sister who lives in Columbus. I live in Columbus, I said. That part's accurate. He laughed finally, and it broke something loose in the air between us. I drove home on 270 with the heat on and the radio off. I passed the exits I'd passed 1,000 times before. The ones that led toward Akron, toward the garage with the landscaping equipment, toward the house where I grew up invisible. I didn't get off at any of them. I kept going. I thought about what I had said in that room, not as a triumph, not as revenge, but as something simpler than both of those words, a correction. A decade of staying quiet had been useful in its way. It had let me build something real without anyone's approval or interference. But it had also let people fill in the silence with their own story, and their story had made me the charity case, the rough patch, the overlooked footnote in my brother's impressive life. I was done being a footnote. The Columbus skyline came up in my windshield around midnight. The lights were on in the office towers, and I thought about the people still working, the way I had worked at 23, the way I had believed in something nobody else could see yet. I had never needed anyone in that room to believe in me, but I had needed them to stop lying about who I was, and now at least they knew. I pulled into my parking garage and sat in the car for a little while before going in. I wasn't sad. I wasn't triumphant. I was just present, quiet in a different way than I had been quiet before. The kind of quiet you get to on the other side of something you've been carrying a long time. My phone buzzed. A text from my mom. Can we talk tomorrow? I have a lot to say. I love you. I always have. I read it twice. Then I wrote back. I know. I love you too. Call me in the morning. I got out of the car and walked toward the elevator, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like the ground under my feet was actually mine. I used to think staying quiet was a form of kindness. That if I kept my head down and let things go, I was being the bigger person. But there's a difference between choosing not to fight and allowing people to write a story about you that isn't true. For a long time, I confused those two things. What Serena's mother said about the new ownership, no history in this city, new money, said just loud enough to carry, wasn't unusual. I'd heard variations of it my whole life. The implication that where you come from is a ceiling, that a girl from Akron with a partial scholarship and a flannel shirt doesn't belong in the same room as people with Hilton Head houses and charity galas. I had absorbed that message for so long that I'd started organizing my life around it. Stay invisible, don't make claims, don't take up space. The thing is, invisibility has a cost. I paid it for years, and the people around me got to feel comfortable at my expense. What I did that night wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I've thought about it a lot since. Revenge would have felt hot. What I felt was something quieter, a kind of steadiness. I had simply decided that the truth was allowed to exist in the room, that I was allowed to exist in the room. Not the version of me they'd invented, but the actual one. There's something that happens when you do the work, real work, patient work, the kind that nobody sees and nobody applauds for long enough. You start to understand that the approval you thought you needed was never the point. I spent 10 years building something. I spent 6 years quietly making sure my family didn't lose their house. I did those things because they were right, not because I was waiting for credit. But I also learned eventually that letting people take credit that isn't theirs, or worse, letting them fill your silence with contempt, is not the same as humility. It's just erasure with a polite face on it. My brother Liam asked me why I never told him. I said I wanted to see how long it took someone to ask. That was honest, but it was only part of the answer. The fuller answer is that I was afraid that if I said out loud what I had built, something would break. The fragile arrangement where I got to love my family from a safe distance without having to face what they actually thought of me. Hiding was easier than knowing. But you can't build a real relationship on a lie of omission. Liam and I had been strangers for years, and part of that was on me. I'd let it happen. I'd chosen the clean story over the complicated truth, and we'd both paid for it. The morning after the party, my mom called. She talked for 20 minutes before I said much. She cried twice. She said she didn't know, and I believed her. And I also understood that not knowing had required a certain amount of not asking. That's the uncomfortable part. The people who love us aren't always looking as closely as we assume. What I walked away from that night understanding is this: the way you move through hard things matters more than whether you win them. I could have gone to that party and said nothing. I could have stayed in my quiet corner and driven home and let Serena's mother go on believing what she believed. And on the outside, nothing would have changed. But something in me would have gotten smaller. You can only shrink so many times before the shape of you starts to change permanently. The ground under your feet is only yours if you're willing to say so. I'm still learning how to say so, but I'm learning.